Marcus Johnson had been looking forward to this beach vacation for months. As a dedicated FBI agent with 15 years specializing in civil rights investigations, his work often consumed him, leaving little time for his family. But now, with a week of leave approved, he was determined to give his wife Tanya and their 2 children the perfect getaway they deserved. "Dad, are we almost there?" asked his daughter Zoe from the backseat, barely looking up from her phone. At 14, she pretended to be too cool for family vacations, but Marcus had caught her excited smile when he'd first announced their trip to Bayshore, a picturesque coastal town known for its pristine beaches. "Just about 20 minutes more, sweetie," he replied, glancing in the rearview mirror at 10-year-old Marcus Jr., who had fallen asleep clutching his action figure. Beside him, Tanya squeezed his hand, her eyes reflecting the same contentment he felt. After months of intense casework involving discrimination cases across several states, Marcus could finally exhale. The rental house exceeded their expectations, a charming 2-story beach cottage with a wraparound porch and ocean views. After unpacking, hunger set in, and they decided to try a local seafood restaurant that had excellent online reviews. The restaurant, though busy, seemed to quiet slightly when they entered. Marcus felt the familiar weight of unwanted attention, stares that lingered too long, smiles that didn't reach eyes, service that was noticeably cooler than what other tables received. His professional training made him hyper-aware of these subtle shifts, but for his family's sake, he chose to ignore them. "How's your lobster roll?" he asked Tanya, deliberately keeping his voice light. "Amazing," she replied, though her eyes told him she'd noticed the atmosphere too. Years of marriage to an FBI agent had given her similar instincts. They finished their meal without incident, paid the bill, and headed back to their rental as the sun began to set, casting golden light across the ocean. Marcus felt himself starting to unwind for the first time in months. The kids chatted animatedly in the backseat about their plans for building the world's greatest sandcastle tomorrow. The flashing blue lights appeared suddenly behind them on the quiet coastal road. Marcus checked his speed automatically. He'd been going exactly at the limit. He pulled over carefully, already feeling a familiar tightness in his chest. "Daddy, why are we stopping?" asked Marcus Jr., sitting up straighter. "Just a policeman who wants to talk to us, buddy. Nothing to worry about," he said, keeping his voice steady while exchanging a quick glance with Tanya. Marcus put both hands on the steering wheel where they would be visible, a habit born from both his professional knowledge and personal experience as a black man in America. The approaching officer's hand rested near his weapon, his face set in a hard expression that immediately concerned Marcus. "License and registration," the officer demanded without greeting or explanation for the stop. "May I ask why I've been pulled over, officer?" Marcus asked politely. The officer's expression darkened. "License and registration first." As Marcus carefully reached for his wallet, a second patrol car pulled up, its lights also flashing. His children's excitement about vacation had vanished, replaced by confused silence. Tanya reached back to hold their hands, her face a careful mask of calm for their benefit. "Step out of the vehicle," ordered the first officer after barely glancing at Marcus's license. "Sir, I haven't been informed why I was stopped. I have my family with me and—" "I said step out of the vehicle. All of you now." More officers approached from the second car. Marcus felt the situation spiraling, but knew that protecting his family meant complying while documenting everything mentally for what would surely come later. "It's okay," he told his now frightened children. "We're going to do what they say. Everything will be fine." As they stepped out into the cooling evening air, Marcus could see curiosity turning to fear in his children's eyes. The vacation they had dreamed about was taking a turn none of them could have imagined, and the worst part was that Marcus knew exactly why. A reality he had spent his career fighting against, now unfolding around his own family. The family stood silently by the roadside, the ocean breeze now feeling cold rather than refreshing. Little Marcus Jr. pressed against his mother's side, his earlier sleepiness replaced by fear. Zoe, trying to appear brave, kept glancing between her father and the police officers. "We're on vacation," Tanya explained, her voice controlled despite her racing heart. "We just arrived today. Is there a problem?" The officer ignored her question, instead addressing his partner. "Run the plates again. Check for any outstanding warrants." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "Officer, I'd appreciate knowing why we were pulled over. We haven't broken any traffic laws." The second officer, taller with a crew cut, stepped closer. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. A vehicle matching your description." "What description would that be?" Marcus asked carefully. "A family SUV." "Watch your tone," the first officer snapped. "Empty your pockets, all of you." Marcus could see his son's lower lip trembling. He'd wanted to shield his children from this reality for as long as possible, but here it was, playing out on a peaceful beach road during what should have been their perfect vacation. "Sir, my children are scared," Marcus said quietly. "Could we at least move them away from the roadside? It's not safe here with passing cars." "They're fine where they are," replied the officer curtly as a third patrol car pulled up, its lights flooding the darkening scene with harsh blue and red pulses. Marcus noticed how the officers tensed when he reached slowly into his back pocket. "I'm just getting my wallet," he explained, movements deliberately slow. "Inside you'll find my credentials. I'm a federal agent." The officer snatched the wallet, flipping through it with obvious skepticism. "FBI. Right. And I'm the president." "You can verify my identity," Marcus said calmly. "I work out of the Washington Field Office, Civil Rights Division." Something flickered across the officer's face. Uncertainty, perhaps, or annoyance that this situation might be more complicated than he'd anticipated. "Daddy," Marcus Jr.'s voice was small. "Did we do something wrong?" Before Marcus could answer, the crew cut officer cut in. "Everyone against the car. We're going to search the vehicle." "You don't have probable cause," Marcus objected. "I do not consent to a search." The first officer stepped closer, his hand moving to his belt. "You refusing to cooperate?" A middle-aged couple walking their dog slowed down to watch the scene unfolding. Marcus noticed them immediately. Witnesses could be crucial later. "I'm not refusing anything," Marcus explained. "I'm asserting my constitutional rights and those of my family. If you have reasonable suspicion for a stop, please explain it. Otherwise, we should be free to continue to our vacation rental." The third officer who had just arrived approached, conferring quietly with the first two. Marcus could read the body language. They were realizing this stop might have consequences they hadn't anticipated. Tanya, always perceptive, used this moment to speak softly to their children. "Remember what Dad always says? Know your rights and stay calm. This isn't right, but we'll handle it properly." Zoe nodded, straightening her shoulders. Even at 14, she understood the unfairness of what was happening. Marcus Jr. wiped his eyes with his sleeve, trying to be brave like his sister. The first officer returned, his demeanor slightly altered. "We've had reports of drug trafficking in this area." "And you think a family of 4 on vacation fits that profile?" Marcus asked. "Based on what specific indicators?" A passing car slowed dramatically, the driver clearly watching the scene. More witnesses. Marcus felt a small measure of relief. Public attention often changed the dynamics of these encounters. "Look," said the crew cut officer, his voice lowered but still hostile. "Just let us do a quick search, and you can be on your way." "No," Marcus replied firmly. "I won't set that example for my children. If you don't have probable cause, then we should be free to go." The standoff continued as tension built. Marcus knew this moment well from both sides, as an agent and as a black man. But this time was different. This time his children were watching, learning either that the system worked or that their father's authority meant nothing in the face of prejudice. The lead officer's radio crackled. He listened, then gave Marcus a hard look before stepping away to respond. Whatever was said in that exchange seemed to shift the atmosphere. Something was changing, but the family remained motionless, waiting to see if their vacation was merely interrupted or truly over before it had begun. The lead officer returned from his radio conversation, his expression hardened with resolve rather than reason. Whatever had been said hadn't diffused the situation as Marcus had hoped. "We're going to need all of you to come down to the station," the officer announced, crossing his arms. "On what charges?" Marcus asked, maintaining his composure despite the rising tension. "We have questions about your presence in this area. There's been a series of break-ins at vacation rentals." Tanya stepped forward, her patience visibly wearing thin. "So every family that rents a beach house is now a suspect? Or is there something specific about us that caught your attention? The officer ignored her question, turning instead to his colleagues. Separate them for transport. Those words sent a wave of panic through the children. Marcus Jr. began to cry openly now, while Zoe's face showed a mixture of fear and dawning outrage. Absolutely not, Marcus said firmly. My children will not be separated from us. There are no grounds for detaining us, let alone splitting up our family. People were gathering now. A small crowd of onlookers had formed at a cautious distance. Some had phones out, recording the scene. Marcus noticed a woman in jogging clothes talking animatedly on her phone while pointing in their direction. Dad, Zoe whispered, someone's recording this. The crude cut officer noticed too and shifted uncomfortably, turning to the lead officer. Maybe we should. Follow procedure, the lead officer cut him off, then turned back to Marcus. Sir, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Marcus took a deliberate breath. Years of training had prepared him for tense situations, but nothing had prepared him for seeing his own children trembling at the hands of law enforcement. I'm going to reach for my phone to call my supervisor, Marcus said clearly, making sure the growing crowd of witnesses could hear. I'm an FBI agent working in civil rights. My supervisor will want to know why a family is being detained without cause. Hands where I can see them. The lead officer's hand moved to his holster, causing gasps from the onlookers. Tanya stepped between the officer and her husband. There are children present. Please lower your voice and your hand from your weapon. The third officer, who had remained mostly silent, finally spoke. Frank, let's take a step back here. He was older than the others, with gray at his temples. Sir, may I see your FBI credentials again? Marcus nodded. They're in the wallet your colleague is holding. The older officer took the wallet, examining the badge and ID card more carefully than his colleague had. His expression changed subtly as he read. Civil Rights Division? He asked quietly. 15 years, Marcus confirmed. The officer handed the wallet back with noticeably more respect. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Has there? Marcus asked, accepting his wallet. I'd like to understand exactly what prompted this stop. The radio crackled again. This time the message seemed urgent. The lead officer listened, his face darkening as he glanced repeatedly at Marcus. We just got word from dispatch, he said stiffly. You're free to go. That's it. Tanya asked incredulously. No apology, no explanation. Marcus placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. What changed in the last 5 minutes? He asked the officers. Did dispatch confirm my identity, or did they tell you that detained families make for bad publicity when bystanders are filming? The crowd had grown larger, with several cars now pulled over. The officers shifted uncomfortably under the public scrutiny. Just a routine stop, sir, the lead officer insisted, but his earlier confidence had evaporated. We're doing our job keeping this community safe. By terrorizing children? Zoe asked suddenly, her voice breaking the tension. Despite her youth, her words carried the weight of the injustice they were experiencing. The older officer at least had the decency to look ashamed. We apologize for the inconvenience, he said, though the words fell flat against what the family had just endured. Marcus knew this moment well, the abrupt de-escalation when officers realized they'd overstepped with someone who could actually hold them accountable. It wasn't a victory. It was a glimpse of what happened countless times without witnesses or credentials to force a different outcome. We'll be filing a formal complaint, Marcus informed them, his voice level but firm. And I'll be requesting all bodycam footage and dispatch recordings. The family returned to their car, the officers suddenly eager to have them leave. As they pulled away, Marcus noticed his hands were shaking on the steering wheel, not from fear but from a familiar, burning anger at how easily a perfect family memory had been poisoned. Are we in trouble, Dad? Marcus Jr. asked from the backseat, his voice small. No, buddy, we didn't do anything wrong, Marcus answered, catching his son's eye in the rearview mirror. And that's the important thing to remember. The family drove in silence back toward their rental, the beautiful sunset now just a darkening sky, the excitement of their vacation replaced by a heaviness that followed them like the patrol cars that had now disappeared from view. The family drove in tense silence, the beach house no longer seeming like the sanctuary they had eagerly anticipated just hours earlier. Tanya reached over and squeezed her husband's hand, a silent gesture of support that spoke volumes. In the backseat, Zoe had her arm around her little brother, who had finally stopped crying but still looked shaken. "I think we should talk about what just happened," Tanya said gently, breaking the silence as they pulled into the driveway of their rental. The porch lights they'd left on glowed warmly, a stark contrast to the cold blue and red lights they'd just escaped. "Not now," her husband replied, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Let's get inside first." Once in the house, the children disappeared to their rooms without being asked. Zoe, displaying a maturity beyond her 14 years, took her brother upstairs, promising to help him set up his video game console, a distraction they both needed. In the kitchen, Tanya watched her husband pace, his phone pressed to his ear. After 15 years together, she recognized the controlled fury in his movements, the way he kept his voice steady despite the storm she knew was raging inside him. "Yes, sir. I understand the jurisdiction issues, but this needs immediate attention," he said into the phone. The officers had no probable cause, refused to state a legitimate reason for the stop, and attempted to separate us from our children. He paused, listening. "I've already requested all bodycam footage and dispatch recordings. My badge number and credentials were verified, which is the only reason we're not sitting in separate interrogation rooms right now." Another pause. "Yes, sir, I appreciate that. First thing tomorrow would be ideal." He ended the call and finally sat down at the kitchen island, dropping his head into his hands. Tanya moved behind him, resting her hands on his shoulders. "Tom's sending a field agent from the nearest office to take our statement first thing tomorrow," he explained. "And he's contacting the local police department chief directly." "Good," Tanya said firmly. "But what about tonight? What about the kids?" He lifted his head, the weight of parental responsibility tempering his professional indignation. "You're right. We need to check on them." They found their son curled up on his bed, not playing video games as they'd expected, but staring out the window at the ocean, barely visible in the darkness. "Hey, buddy," his father said softly, sitting beside him. "You okay?" The boy shrugged, not meeting his father's eyes. Were those bad police officers? His parents exchanged a look loaded with the complexity of answering such a seemingly simple question. "They weren't doing their job correctly," his father finally answered. "Police officers are supposed to protect people and follow rules about how they treat everyone. Those officers didn't follow the rules. Because we're black?" The directness of the question hung in the air. His father took a deep breath. "That might have been part of it. But it's important you know that what happened wasn't right, no matter who it happens to." "But it happens to us more," Zoe said from the doorway, where she'd been listening. "That's why you joined the FBI, right, Dad? To fix it?" "Come here," he said, patting the bed beside him. Zoe crossed the room and sat down, looking far too grown-up in her serious expression. "Yes, that's part of why I do what I do. But tonight, I'm not Agent Johnson. I'm just your dad, and I'm sorry you both had to experience that." "I was scared," his son admitted quietly. "Me too," his father confessed, surprising both children. "Even adults get scared sometimes. But being brave doesn't mean not feeling fear. It means doing what's right even when you're afraid." Tanya sat on the other side of the bed. "And tomorrow is a new day. We still have our whole vacation ahead of us." "But what if those police come back?" their son asked, the worry evident in his voice. "They won't," his father assured him with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "My boss is talking to their boss. And remember all those people who stopped to watch? Some of them were recording what happened. That helps keep everyone safe and honest." "Like witnesses?" Zoe asked, showing her quick understanding. "Exactly like witnesses," he confirmed. "Now, who wants ice cream for dinner?" "I think we've earned a vacation rule breaker tonight." The mention of ice cream finally brought a small smile to his son's face. "Can I have chocolate and vanilla?" "You can have whatever flavors you want," Tanya laughed, relieved to see a glimpse of normal childhood emerging from the shadow of the evening's events. As they headed downstairs to raid the freezer, his phone buzzed with a text from his supervisor. "Chief Henderson apologizes for his officer's conduct. Internal investigation opened. Take statements tomorrow at 10 a.m. Enjoy your vacation after that." He slipped the phone back into his pocket without sharing the message. Tomorrow would be time enough for more official matters. Tonight was about healing, about ice cream for dinner, and reminding his children that despite what had happened, they were safe, they were loved, and they had done nothing wrong. The next morning arrived with perfect beach weather, sunlight streaming through the blinds and the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. But inside the vacation rental, the mood remained subdued. The father woke early, sitting on the porch with his coffee, watching the sunrise while making calls to his office. By the time the rest of the family stirred, he had already showered and dressed more formally than vacation called for, khaki pants and a button-down shirt rather than the swim trunks and t-shirt he planned for their first full day at the beach. "Do we have to talk to the police today?" his son asked over a breakfast of cereal that no one seemed particularly interested in eating. "Not the police," his father corrected gently. "An FBI agent from the field office about 2 hours away is coming here. Her name is Agent Chen, and she's very nice. She just needs to hear what happened from all of us." "Even me?" the boy asked, pushing his cereal around the bowl. "Even you, buddy. Your experience matters too." Tanya reached across the table to squeeze her son's hand. "We'll all be together. It won't take long, and then we can hit the beach, okay?" The doorbell rang precisely at 10 o'clock. Agent Chen was younger than they expected, with a warm smile that helped ease some of the tension in the room. She introduced herself to the children first, kneeling down to their level to shake hands with the boy, who responded with shy politeness. "I understand yesterday was pretty rough," Agent Chen said, once they were all seated in the living room. "I'm sorry that happened to your family, especially on vacation. Will those officers get in trouble?" Zhou asked immediately. Agent Chen didn't sugarcoat her answer. "That depends on what we find in our investigation. Your dad requested the body camera footage, which I've already reviewed this morning." The father straightened in his seat. "And it supports your account completely," Agent Chen confirmed. "The officers had no legitimate reason for the stop. There was no report of suspicious activity matching your vehicle, no break-ins in the area as they claimed." "So they lied," Tanya said flatly, her hand tightening around her husband's. Agent Chen nodded. "The police chief has been extremely cooperative since learning of the incident. He's placed all 3 officers on administrative leave pending a full internal investigation." "Administrative leave," the father repeated with a hint of bitterness. "So they get a paid vacation while my family deals with the aftermath of their actions." "Dad," Zoe whispered, nodding toward her brother, who was staring at the floor, shoulders hunched. The father immediately softened his tone. "I'm sorry, buddy. Adult stuff okay, nothing for you to worry about." Agent Chen opened her laptop. "I need to take formal statements from each of you. We can start with you," she said, looking at the father, "and then move on to the rest of the family. Would it be better if we did this somewhere private?" "No," the father said firmly. "We do this as a family. No secrets. What happened affected all of us." The next 2 hours were exhausting as they relived the previous evening's events in meticulous detail. Agent Chen was thorough but kind, especially with the children, letting them express their feelings without pushing too hard. "The chief has requested to meet with you personally," Agent Chen told the father as she prepared to leave. "He's offered to come here to avoid cutting further into your vacation time." The father looked at his family, considering, "Would tomorrow morning work? I'd like to salvage what's left of today for actual vacation activities." After Agent Chen left, the family sat in silence for a moment. "Can we go to the beach now?" the boy finally asked in a small voice. His father smiled, the first genuine smile since their arrival. "Absolutely. Race you to see who can change into their swimsuit first." The beach was busy but not crowded. They found a perfect spot to set up their umbrella and chairs, the children immediately running toward the water while their parents watched from shore. "They're resilient," Tanya observed, watching their son laugh as a wave splashed him. "They shouldn't have to be," her husband replied quietly. "Not about this." Tanya rested her head on his shoulder. "But they are. And they're learning important lessons about standing up for what's right. They're watching you turn an injustice into accountability." As they watched their children play in the waves, the father's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at it briefly, then turned the phone off completely, tossing it into the beach bag. "Work can wait," he said. "Right now, I'm just a dad on vacation with his amazing family." For the first time since their arrival, They began to relax into the rhythm of vacation life, building sandcastles, splashing in the waves, and trying very hard to focus on creating new memories rather than dwelling on the ones they wished they could forget. The morning of their third day in Bayshore arrived with a mixture of sunshine and apprehension. The father dressed carefully for his meeting with the police chief, once again choosing clothes that balanced casual vacation attire with the professionalism his position demanded. His FBI credentials sat on the kitchen counter, not as a prop but as a reminder of who he was beyond this vacation, beyond this incident. "Are you sure you don't want me there?" Tanya asked, handing him a cup of coffee. "I'm sure," he replied, checking his watch. "The kids need normalcy. Take them to that shell-collecting tour we signed up for. I'll meet you for lunch after." The doorbell rang precisely at 9. The police chief was a tall man with salt and pepper hair and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and stress. He arrived alone, without uniform, in slacks and a polo shirt, a deliberate choice that wasn't lost on the FBI agent. "Thank you for meeting me here," the chief said, taking a seat at the kitchen table. "I wanted to personally apologize for what happened to you and your family." "I appreciate that," the father replied, his tone professional but reserved. "But I'm more interested in what happens next." The chief nodded, placing a folder on the table. "I reviewed all the evidence personally, the body camera footage, the dispatch recordings, everything. There was no justification for the stop. No reports matching your vehicle. No break-ins in this area." "So they targeted us based on what, exactly?" the father asked, though both men knew the answer. The chief didn't flinch from the implication. "Based on racial profiling, which violates not only our department policies, but also basic human decency and constitutional law." The straightforward admission was unexpected. The father had prepared for defensiveness, for bureaucratic language that danced around the ugly truth. "All 3 officers have been placed on administrative leave," the chief continued. "But after reviewing the evidence, I've recommended termination for Officer Turner, who initiated the stop. The other 2 will face disciplinary action and mandatory retraining, but they at least attempted to de-escalate toward the end." "Administrative punishments are necessary but not sufficient," the father said, leaning forward. "What systemic changes will prevent this from happening to the next family who doesn't have an FBI badge to protect them?" The chief seemed to have anticipated this question. He opened the folder, revealing a document with the department letterhead. "This is our new action plan. We're implementing mandatory bias training for all officers, quarterly rather than annually. We're revising our traffic stop protocols to require clear articulation of reasonable suspicion before initiating any stop. And we're establishing a civilian review board with actual authority to recommend disciplinary action." The father scanned the document, his professional eye noting both the strengths and weaknesses of the proposal. "This is a start," he acknowledged. "But I don't see anything here about recruitment practices or changes to leadership evaluation metrics." The chief looked genuinely interested. "I'm open to suggestions." For the next hour, they discussed concrete changes that could transform departmental culture. The conversation was remarkably collaborative, 2 professionals united by a shared goal, despite arriving from different perspectives. "Your son," the chief said hesitantly as their meeting wound down. "How is he doing?" The question, personal rather than professional, caught the father off guard. "He had nightmares last night," he admitted. He wanted to know if the mean police were going to come back. The chief winced. "I have a grandson about his age. I can't imagine." He trailed off, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, official-looking card. "Would it help if he had this? It's a junior police supporter card. Usually they're just for community events, but..." The father considered the gesture. "Maybe. But what would help more is knowing that your officers see him as someone to protect, not someone to fear." The chief nodded solemnly. "That's exactly why I need people like you holding us accountable." He stood to leave, then hesitated. "There's been some local media attention. I've declined to comment out of respect for your privacy, but if you're willing to speak publicly about this incident, it could help drive home the importance of these changes." The father thought about his family, about their interrupted vacation, about the difficult conversations they'd already had with their children. "Let me discuss it with my wife. This affects all of us." After the chief left, he stood alone in the kitchen, looking out at the beach where families played without the weight he now carried. His phone buzzed with a text from Tanya. Everything okay? The kids found amazing shells. Tour guide says there's a spot where we might see dolphins this afternoon. He smiled, feeling some of the tension release. All good, he texted back. Chief actually listened. Tell the kids I'm on my way, and I want to see every single shell they found. As he grabbed his keys, his gaze fell on the folder the chief had left behind. There was work still to be done, systems to change, accountability to ensure. But right now, there were shells to admire and possibly dolphins to see. The rest could wait a few more hours. The final day of their beach vacation arrived too quickly, the week having passed in a blur of contrasting emotions. What had begun with tension and fear had gradually transformed into something unexpected, not the carefree vacation they'd planned, but perhaps something more valuable. The family sat on the beach, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Their son was burying his father's feet in sand, giggling whenever a wave came close enough to threaten his construction project. Zoe, having declared herself too mature for sandcastles this year, was taking photos of the sunset with her mother's phone. Last sunset, Tanya said softly, leaning against her husband's shoulder. This time anyway, he replied, wrapping an arm around her. We'll come back. This simple declaration held more significance than an outsider might understand. 2 days earlier, they had seriously discussed cutting the vacation short, returning to the familiar safety of home. But that morning over breakfast, they had unanimously voted to stay, refusing to let one incident steal the joy they'd worked so hard to create. The local newspaper had run a story about the incident and the subsequent changes the police department was implementing. The reporter had reached out several times, but the family had declined interviews, preferring to process their experience privately. What happened in public would unfold through official channels. How they dealt with it as a family was theirs alone. Dad, their son asked, looking up from his sand engineering project. Are those police officers still going to have jobs when we go home? The straightforward question, delivered with a child's innocence, cut through the peaceful moment. The father considered how to answer truthfully without burdening his son with adult complexities. Some of them won't, he answered finally. The one who started it all is probably going to lose his job. The others will have to learn how to be better officers. Could, the boy said firmly, patting more sand onto his father's feet. They were mean. Zoe wandered back, pocketing her mother's phone. I think what happened to us changed things here, she observed, displaying the perceptiveness that sometimes made her parents forget she was only 14. I overheard people talking at the ice cream shop yesterday. They said the police are changing how they do things because of what happened to a vacationing family. That's part of how change happens, the father confirmed. One incident at a time, one policy change at a time. Seems slow, Zoe said, frowning. It is slow, her father agreed. Too slow, but it's still important. Their son looked up again. I told my friend Billy back home that my dad makes police be good. Is that right? The adults exchanged smiles. That's one way to put it, his father chuckled. But it's not just me. It's everyone who speaks up when they see something wrong. Tanya checked her watch. We should head back soon if we want to finish packing tonight. The boy instantly protested. 5 more minutes. I almost have Dad completely buried. 5 more minutes, his father agreed, winking at Tanya. As the children returned to their activities, Tanya lowered her voice. Have you decided about the community meeting next month? The chief seemed really eager to have you speak. He watched his children playing in the fading light, considering the question he'd been wrestling with all week. I'm going to do it, he said finally. But not just as an FBI agent. As a father. Sometimes that's the more powerful position. After their 5 more minutes had stretched to 15, they gathered their beach supplies and headed back to the rental house. Their son ran ahead, stopping to collect one final shell, while Zoe walked between her parents, uncharacteristically reaching for both their hands as she had when she was much younger. Next vacation, can we go somewhere with mountains instead? She asked. I think I've had enough beach drama for a while. Her father laughed, genuinely and freely for perhaps the first time that week. Mountains it is. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the suitcases packed, the couple sat on the porch swing, listening to the waves they couldn't see in the darkness. "We came here looking for rest," Tanya reflected, "and instead found purpose." "We found both," her husband corrected, taking her hand, "just not in the order we expected." They sat in comfortable silence, the gentle creaking of the swing marking the passing moments. Tomorrow they would return to their normal lives, work, school, routines. But they would carry with them not just seashells and souvenirs, but a shared experience that had tested and ultimately strengthened their family bonds. What had begun as a simple vacation had become a pivotal chapter in their family story, one that reminded them of challenges still to overcome, but also of their resilience in facing them together.